They're meant to initiate you into a certain awareness. You do them very infrequently. The great Eleusinian mysteries, people went once in their lives. You weren't allowed to talk about them. Speaking about what happened was, really forbidden. And they were just like, treated sacred. And that's it. They weren't like sold on the street. You didn't have these, profiteers like Doblin or, they weren't, they were sacred. And they just sort of, your use of them was, um, was private and effective. And that's that's similar to how the peyote is used in, you look at indigenous societies, they weren't part of the daily life. They weren't advertising, you know. There's been this tremendous co-option of indigenous practices in the modern use. I see this a lot, like the ayahuasca is used like in every, like another, in the 80s and 90s, it was the rave scene. Like every major city throughout the world, there were these warehouses set up and hundreds, thousands of young people would be given MDMA and listening to this mind-numbing music. And now then there's this, huge wave of ayahuasca. I saw this stuff happening in my own life there. That in the 1980s, very few people, anthropologists and serious people investigating indigenous practices knew about ayahuasca. Now it's like every city and town in the country, there's 10 ayahuasca groups going on. People paying hundreds of dollars to these people that call themselves ayahuasqueros. There's a total profaning of an indigenous practice, and rampant sexual abuse and, real profaning of something sacred. Yeah.
And people almost just want to check boxes now and seek the next spiritual event or workshop and almost show people their resume of psychedelic passport. Like, hey, I've done Bufo and I've done ayahuasca. And it's almost like it gives them this hierarchy of importance, and it's not true at all. It's like, I've done ayahuasca 55 times, but you're still the same character. And it's like, well, I know that after the one time that I went down there, Don Howard had that place in the early 90s, and he was one of two places, and there was no marketing. It was all word of mouth. It was done with care. And I waited 7 years to have some experience like that. And when I came back from it, I even told him, I said, I may never do that again. And he said, that's the beautiful approach. It's not something, it's a lifetime of integrating that experience. And now it's like, nope, it's the next bump, and people are going to keep. And I'm trying not to be as judgmental about it, but it's just the truth. I think we in the West, we do that with things. We did it with yoga. And I would actually like to hear your perspective on Indian mysticism and the CIA's involvement with bringing that stuff to the Western culture and how much that took off. Because that was all corrupt too. We saw how the gurus and how many people ended up exploiting their power. And it's still happening today at yoga studios. And it's a mess, man. I tell people, maybe you shouldn't do any of this stuff. Maybe you should just go gently into it and read the history first and try some breath work on your own and start to explore consciousness gently and start to build tools and context before leaping in with some neo shaman that's wearing a big brimmed hat and big beads and he says he's a shaman on Instagram. It's so freaking embarrassing.
Yep. Well, you got it. I mean, there's not much more that we can say about it, but it is kind of the same thing. We saw this wave of Eastern mysticism coming over in the 50s. It was really kind of sped up with psychedelics, all these gurus coming over.